One of the biggest mistakes people make in relationships is spending their lives chasing people who are never truly choosing them in the first place. And the painful part is, a lot of folks don't even realize they're doing it. They call it love. They call it loyalty. They call it fighting for the relationship. But let me tell you something. There's a difference between fighting for love and begging for attention. Real love does not leave you confused every single day about where you stand. If somebody truly values you, you won't have to constantly decode mixed signals like you're solving a mystery. You won't have to stare at your phone all night wondering why they haven't called. You won't have to shrink yourself down just to keep somebody interested. A person who genuinely wants you in their life will make space for you. They will show effort. They will show consistency. And most importantly, they will show clarity. Too many people settle for crumbs because they're afraid of eating alone. They accept half-hearted love because they think half is better than nothing. So they keep texting first, keep forgiving disrespect, keep making excuses for somebody who keeps proving over and over again that they are emotionally unavailable. And every time they come back with a sweet apology or a little bit of attention, you start hoping again. But hope can become dangerous when it keeps you attached to somebody who only remembers your value when they feel you slipping away. There's a woman out there right now listening to this, and she knows exactly what I'm talking about. She spent years giving everything she had to a man who treated commitment like it was a burden. Every time she asked where the relationship was going, he'd say, "Just give me time." Meanwhile, she gave him her loyalty, her energy, her prayers, her support. She celebrated him when nobody else believed in him. She stood by him through hard times, but somehow, no matter how much she gave, she still felt emotionally alone. And one day, something inside her broke. Not in a weak way, in a powerful way. She got tired of being available for somebody who treated her like an option instead of a priority. So she stopped chasing. She stopped calling first. She stopped rearranging her life to accommodate somebody who wouldn't do the same for her. And here's where her life changed. She started focusing on herself. She started healing. She started investing her energy into things that gave something back to her spirit. She joined a gym. She went back to school. She rebuilt friendships she had neglected. She found joy again. And little by little, the sadness that once controlled her started losing its power. Then suddenly the same man who ignored her consistency began noticing her absence. Now he's texting more, calling more, asking where she's been. Why? Because people often take your presence for granted until they no longer have access to it. But by then she had changed. She finally understood something important. Your worth does not decrease because somebody failed to recognize it. See, when you spend your life chasing people who aren't choosing you, you lose pieces of yourself trying to earn love that should have been freely given. You start doubting your beauty, your intelligence, your value. But the truth is, the problem was never that you weren't enough. The problem was you were giving your best to somebody who lacked the maturity to appreciate it. The moment you stop chasing validation from people who overlook your heart, your whole life shifts. You walk differently. You think differently. You stop begging for seats at tables where you were never respected. And that confidence, that peace, that self-respect, it changes everything. Because the right people won't require you to exhaust yourself proving your worth. The right people will recognize your value without you having to beg for it. One of the most important lessons you will ever learn in life is this: people treat you according to the standards you accept. Read that again in your spirit. The way you allow people to speak to you, disappoint you, ignore you, and disrespect you teaches them what they can get away with. And too many good-hearted people are suffering today because they keep giving chances to people who never deserved access in the first place. See, having a good heart is beautiful. Being loving, patient, supportive, and forgiving are powerful qualities. But if you're not careful, people will take your kindness and mistake it for weakness. They'll assume that because you keep forgiving, you'll never leave. They'll assume that because you love deeply, you'll tolerate behavior that slowly destroys your peace. And that's dangerous. There are people sitting in relationships right now where they've been lied to repeatedly, disrespected publicly, ignored emotionally, and neglected consistently. Yet every time they think about walking away, fear talks them into staying. Fear says, "What if nobody else loves me?" Fear says, "Maybe they'll change." Fear says, "I've already invested too much time." But let me tell you something about self-respect. It requires courage, because sometimes respecting yourself means disappointing other people. Sometimes it means walking away from somebody you still love, because you finally realize love without respect will eventually break your spirit. You know what happens when a person has no boundaries? They become emotionally exhausted. They spend their lives trying to prove their worth to people who only appreciate them when it's convenient. They keep lowering the bar, hoping somebody will finally love them correctly. But every time you ignore your own standards just to keep somebody around, you send yourself a dangerous message. My peace is negotiable. And your peace should never be negotiable. There was a young woman who stayed in a relationship for years, with a man who constantly embarrassed her. He flirted with other women openly. He forgot important dates. He disappeared for days without explanation. Every time she confronted him, he'd turn the situation around and make her feel like she was asking for too much. And because she loved him, she tolerated it. That's what happens when your desire to be loved becomes stronger than your commitment to yourself. You start accepting behavior that would have once offended your soul. One day she finally reached her limit. Not because she stopped loving him, but because she started loving herself more. And that changed everything. She stopped answering every late-night call. She stopped accepting weak apologies with no changed behavior behind them. She stopped trying to fix somebody who clearly wasn't trying to grow. And for the first time in years, she chose herself. Now let me tell you what's interesting. The moment she started setting boundaries, the same man who ignored her value suddenly became afraid of losing her. Why? Because people often don't respect access until access is denied. But by then, something inside her had awakened. She realized she had spent years trying to convince somebody to treat her properly, when she should have been convincing herself that she deserved better all along. Self-respect changes your entire life. It changes the way you walk into rooms, it changes the conversations you tolerate, it changes the energy you allow around you. When you truly know your worth, you stop begging for consistency, honesty, and effort, because you understand those things are the bare minimum, not a luxury. And here's the truth a lot of people need to hear. Anybody can say, I love you. But real love shows up through actions. Real love protects your feelings instead of constantly testing your limits. Real love brings peace, not emotional confusion every day of your life. The strongest thing you can ever say is, I deserve better than this. And the moment you believe that with your whole heart, your life begins to change. Pain has a way of changing people. Sometimes it changes them for the worse. Sometimes it hardens their heart, steals their trust, and leaves them emotionally disconnected from the world. But other times, pain becomes the very thing that awakens greatness inside a person. And the difference between those two outcomes often comes down to one decision. Are you going to let your pain destroy you, or are you going to let it develop you? See, everybody talks about success. Everybody celebrates confidence, strength, and resilience. But what people don't always see is the struggle that created it. They don't see the nights somebody cried alone. They don't see the betrayal, the rejection, the disappointment, or the heartbreak that forced a person to rebuild themselves from the inside out. Strong people are not born strong. Life makes them that way. There's somebody listening right now who gave their whole heart to a relationship that fell apart. You trusted somebody with your vulnerability, your dreams, your loyalty, and they still hurt you. And when it happened, it felt like your whole world collapsed. You couldn't eat right, couldn't sleep right. You smiled in public while silently falling apart in private. That kind of pain changes you. And in those moments, people usually go one of two directions. Some people let pain become their identity. They stay stuck in bitterness for years. Every conversation becomes about what happened to them. Every new relationship suffers because they never healed from the last one. They carry old wounds into new seasons and wonder why they still feel empty. But then there are people who decide that their suffering will not be wasted. Those are the people who eventually transform their pain into purpose. I remember hearing about a woman whose marriage ended after more than 20 years together. 20 years. Imagine building your entire life around somebody only to wake up one day, realizing the future you planned no longer exists. She felt embarrassed, lost, angry. She said there were mornings she sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the wall, wondering how she was supposed to start over at her age. And that's the dangerous part about heartbreak. It doesn't just break your heart, it attacks your identity. It makes you question your value. It whispers lies into your spirit, telling you that your best days are behind you. But one day, she made a decision that changed her life. She said, "I can spend the rest of my life mourning what I lost, or I can start building what's next." That was the turning point. She started small. She began taking care of her health. She started reading again. She took classes she had once been too afraid to try. She travelled alone for the first time in her life. And slowly, she discovered something powerful. The woman she became after the pain was stronger than the woman she was before it. That's what growth looks like. Sometimes life breaks you down because the version of you that existed before the pain could no longer carry you into your future. Sometimes the heartbreak you're crying over today is actually creating the wisdom, strength, and maturity you'll need tomorrow. Now, let me be clear. Growth does not mean the pain disappears overnight. Healing is not a straight line. Some days you feel strong, other days memories hit you out of nowhere. But every day you keep going, you prove to yourself that your pain did not defeat you. And there is something powerful about a person who survives what was supposed to destroy them. Those people walk differently. They speak differently. They love differently. Because once you've been broken and rebuilt, you stop taking yourself for granted. You stop settling for less than you deserve. You stop allowing temporary people to control your permanent peace. Your pain can either become a prison or a classroom. One will trap you in bitterness. The other will teach you strength. And one day, if you keep pushing forward, you'll look back at the season that almost broke you and realize it was also the season that introduced you to the strongest version of yourself. One of the hardest things to do after somebody hurts you is to keep moving forward with dignity instead of revenge. Because when your heart gets broken, a part of you wants the other person to feel the same pain they caused you. You want them to finally understand what they lost. You want them to regret every lie, every excuse, every moment they took your love for granted. But here's what life teaches you after enough experience. Revenge may feel satisfying for a moment, but growth changes your life forever. The most powerful response to heartbreak is success. Not fake success for social media. Not pretending you're happy while secretly falling apart. I'm talking about real growth, real healing, real elevation, the kind that changes your confidence, your mindset, your habits, and your future. See, a lot of people stay emotionally stuck because they spend all their energy watching the person who hurt them instead of rebuilding themselves. They check social media every day. They wonder who the person is dating. They replay old conversations in their mind like a movie that never ends. Meanwhile, life keeps moving forward while they stay trapped in the same emotional place. And that's what pain will do if you let it. It will steal your focus from your purpose. There was a man who got blindsided after a breakup. He had invested years into the relationship. He thought they were building a future together. Then one day, she walked away and moved on quickly. He said the rejection crushed him. For months, he isolated himself, stopped taking care of his health, stopped pursuing his goals. Every day became about surviving emotionally. But eventually he realized something important. The relationship had ended, but his life hadn't. And that realization changed him. He started waking up earlier, started exercising, started focusing on his career again. He began reading books about discipline and mindset. He spent less time complaining and more time improving. Slowly, the sadness that once controlled him became motivation. Now listen carefully, because this is important. Success is not just about money. Some of the richest people in the world are emotionally miserable. Real success is becoming mentally stronger, emotionally healthier, spiritually grounded, and physically disciplined. It's building a life so meaningful that your happiness no longer depends on who stayed or who left. And something interesting happens when you truly focus on yourself instead of chasing validation. Your energy changes. Your confidence changes. The sadness in your eyes gets replaced with purpose. People notice it. Opportunities notice it. Even the people who underestimated you start paying attention. Why? Because growth speaks louder than pain ever could. A lot of times, the person who hurt you expects you to stay broken. They expect you to keep begging for answers, keep crying over memories, keep waiting for them to come back. But when they see you evolving without them, it forces them to confront something uncomfortable. They lost access to somebody valuable, and by then you've changed. You're no longer trying to prove your worth to people who couldn't see it. You're too busy building a future that no longer revolves around emotional chaos. That's why you need goals bigger than your heartbreak. Build your health. Build your faith. build your career, build your confidence, build your peace. Because every hour you spend obsessing over somebody who walked away is an hour being stolen from the life you're supposed to create. And let me tell you something powerful. Some of the greatest success stories begin with rejection. Some of the strongest people became strong because pain forced them to grow. What felt like a setback was actually the beginning of their transformation. The breakup taught them discipline. The betrayal taught them discernment. The loneliness taught them self-worth. And eventually they reached a place where they no longer needed revenge because life itself became the proof that they survived. That's the real victory. Not getting even, not making somebody jealous, not trying to hurt somebody back. The real victory is waking up one day and realizing the pain that once almost destroyed you has now become the reason you're stronger, wiser, and more focused than ever before. One of the most painful things a person can experience is waiting for closure from somebody who never intends to give it. You keep replaying conversations in your mind. You keep wondering what you could have done differently. You wait for an apology, an explanation, some kind of moment where the other person finally admits they hurt you. And while you're waiting, your life stays emotionally frozen. That's what happens when your healing becomes dependent on somebody else's accountability. A lot of people believe closure comes from a final conversation. They think healing begins when the other person finally says, "I was wrong." But life doesn't always work that way. Some people leave without explanation. Some people betray you and move on like nothing happened. Some people know they hurt you and still never apologize because they lack the emotional maturity to confront the damage they caused. And that truth hurts. Because deep down, most people don't just want answers. They want validation. They want the person who broke them to finally acknowledge their pain. They want confirmation that the relationship mattered, that the love was real, that the sacrifice wasn't meaningless. But let me tell you something important. Closure does not always come from understanding another person. Sometimes closure comes from finally understanding yourself. There was a woman who stayed emotionally attached to her ex for years after the relationship ended. Every few months, he would reappear in her life just enough to reopen old wounds. A late-night message, a phone call saying he missed her, empty promises about changing. And every time he came back, she allowed herself to believe things would finally be different. But they never were. He kept repeating the same cycle because she kept leaving the door open. And one day she realized something painful. She wasn't waiting for closure anymore. She was waiting for him to become somebody he had never shown himself capable of becoming. That realization changed her life. See, a lot of people fall in love with potential instead of reality. They hold on to who somebody could be while ignoring who they consistently are. They create emotional fantasies around temporary moments and convince themselves those moments are proof of future change. But patterns tell the truth. A person who repeatedly disrespects you, neglects you, lies to you, or disappears when things get hard is showing you their character. And no amount of love from you can transform somebody who refuses to grow on their own. That's why healing begins the moment you stop romanticizing people who keep hurting you. Now let me be clear, acceptance is not easy. It takes strength to stop chasing answers you may never receive. It takes maturity to admit that some people are simply incapable of giving you the love, honesty, or consistency you deserved. But once you accept reality, something powerful happens. You stop wasting emotional energy trying to force closure from people who are emotionally unavailable. And suddenly your peace starts returning. You sleep better. You think clearer. You stop checking your phone, hoping for a message that never truly satisfies your soul. Anyway, because closure is not always hearing, "I'm sorry." Sometimes closure is recognizing the relationship taught you what you will never tolerate again. Sometimes closure is realizing you ignored red flags because you were afraid to lose somebody. Sometimes closure is understanding that love without respect cannot survive. Sometimes closure is accepting that not everybody who hurts you feels guilty about it. And while that may sound harsh, it's also freeing. Because once you stop expecting healing to come from the person who wounded you, you finally take your power back. You begin to understand that your future cannot stay hostage to somebody else's emotional limitations. Your happiness cannot depend on whether another person finally develops self-awareness. Life is too short to spend years waiting for accountability from people who refuse to confront themselves. At some point, you have to choose peace over answers. And one day, you'll look back and realize the closure you were desperately searching for was never in their apology. It was in your decision to move forward without needing one.